Well, we started this series last week as we continue to walk through the Gospel of Luke, just asking the question why. And I know I gave some lighthearted perspectives, maybe some arenas in life where we ask that, and it's funny and humorous. But I think there are a lot of questions of why that are much deeper in life. We were talking as a men's ministry a couple weeks back, and one of the fathers was just expressing sort of the hopelessness of a generation, noticing with his children and his friends and people of the younger generation just feeling a sense of hopelessness, feeling like there's no purpose, there's no reason to do the things that they're called to do. And we were just discussing how even my generation and those who have gone before us, there was some layer of motivation. You know, we were just ready, eager to get out of the house, to start our own thing, to get our own place. And that could be for many reasons. For some of us, it was the house was so miserable, we were just so eager to get away and do our own thing. For some of us, it's just, I just wanted to do my own thing and go. And we don't sense that as much. And he was sharing how he noticed with his kids particularly just sort of this mentality of, why should I go off and go to college? And there's not going to be jobs out there for me anyhow. Or why should I pursue anything? It's all falling apart anyhow. And I think there's this sense of hopelessness that exists in our world which strips us of our why. It strips us of purpose and reason. And as we continue to look at some of the stories or interactions that Jesus has, particularly with the religious leaders, I believe he points us to a very specific why. He points us back to the reason for our design, for our creation, and gives us some hope and direction, and really direction that I would hope that every one of us, whatever generation we're from, we would find from our Creator, the one who made us. And so we're going to look at a story this morning. The story has to do with Jesus, again, interacting with religious leaders. And the religious leaders they lost the picture. They got so captured by the things that they believed and the things that they wanted to do that they lost sight of the reason. They lost sight of the purpose and who it was that God had called them to serve and to care for. It reminded me of a story. Years back, I read a book called Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. And the premise of the book is that we're followers of Jesus Christ, not fans of Jesus Christ, not groupies. We're supposed to be followers of Jesus Christ. And in the book, he shares a story about a man named John Akers, who at the time was the chairman of IBM. And he went into his bank to make a transaction. But when he got there, found out the person he needed to interact with wasn't there. So he couldn't make the transaction he wanted to make. So he went to the teller and he asked if she could validate his parking. And she said, I can't do that because there was no transaction. And so they kind of went back and forth a little bit. And she's like, sir, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. The rules tell me that because there was no transaction, I can't validate your parking. So he made a transaction. He withdrew his $1.5 million account, made the transaction, and now she could validate his parking. And he went home. What she lost in the rules was the reason. She lost sight of the person she was meant to serve. And what we're going to see this morning is that the religious leaders of Jesus' day lost sight of the reason. They had, in their own interpretation of the law or their expansion of the law, lost sight of God's purpose of the law. To care for people, to minister to people, to lead them to know Him and follow Him. And in the story, what I think we'll find are two very important questions. The first comes from them, and the second will be a follow-up from Jesus. We'll be in Luke chapter 6, and I want you to see what happens. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and His disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, and here's our first question, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Now, I started digging through this text, and as I'm digging through this text, it took me to Genesis, to Exodus, to Leviticus, to Deuteronomy, then to 1 Samuel, then to 2 Chronicles, then to Matthew and Mark, and to John, then to Acts, Colossians. Now, some people ask, well, what do you do all week? Well, this week it was a lot of that, just digging through the text. It took me on a journey. Because I was trying to figure out what is it that's the issue here? Why is this such an important thing? And my hope is this morning I could walk you on that journey without losing you in the journey. They ask this question, why do you do what is unlawful? They see Jesus' disciples doing something that they deem to be unlawful. Now, in order for us to understand this, we kind of have to go through the background of the Sabbath. So God created the earth. He created it in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. And from that point on, God had established this structure where man would rest weekly. And then, when God gave the law to Moses, he specifically established a Sabbath day, a day of rest, a day to pause, to cease, is literally what it means. And the Israelites were to cease of their rest. They were to stop working, and they were to cease of their work, and they were to reflect on God. In fact, in the Ten Commandments, it says that they were to no longer work or labor, and those words give an indication of burden and enslavement. The Sabbath day was meant to be a day of finding freedom. To worship God, find freedom from the battle, the wrestle of everyday life. But the indication was that they would rest from their labor, their occupation, their pursuit of whatever, not to rest from caring for one another, ministering to needs, or meeting their own basic needs. The Lord would actually call them to a year of Sabbath, where the land would find rest. 6 years you till the land, the seventh year the land is to rest. That didn't mean they weren't allowed to glean from their fields and eat. It meant they weren't to harvest so as to make money. So God established this whole structure of rest. And I will say, because we live in a blue-collar community, some of you guys and ladies need to learn rest. You need to understand that man's first day was a day of rest. The earth already existed. And too many times we think that if I stop, the world will stop. The world was working before we ever showed up. And I believe that a lot of times our inability to rest has less of a statement of work ethic and more of a statement of lack of trust in God providing for us and taking care of our needs. Some of you need to find rest. But God establishes this system for them. And in time, the Pharisees or the religious leaders would expand. There was simplicity to the law of the Sabbath. No, don't work, don't labor, don't make any of your servants work and labor, don't make anybody in your household work or labor. It's that enslavement, that occupation aspect. But in time, the religious leaders began to interpret what it meant to work. And in the Mishnah, which is basically the writings of the oral traditions of the Jewish leaders, there are 39 categories of work that are written there. And they began to break down what it meant to work, so much so that on the Sabbath, you couldn't look in a mirror so as to fix your image. That was work. On the Sabbath, you couldn't light a fire. Now, the Old Testament does specifically say that, but they would say you can't even light a candle. But you can hire a Gentile to come into your house and light a candle. On the Sabbath, you weren't allowed to walk more than 3,000 feet from your home. So they add all of these stipulations, additions to God's law, and it's in that structure that they interpret what Jesus' disciples are doing. It's in that structure they see them picking grain, which they deem as harvesting. They see them remove the husk from that grain, which they deem as threshing, and then eating that, which they deem as preparing a meal. So they ask the question to Jesus, why do you do what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Now think about that. Our understanding of who Jesus is, he's the Son of God who had existed long before his physical body, who wrote the law. Why do you do what's unlawful? They had added all of these perspectives. Jesus answers them. He says, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. I love what Jesus does. Again, he says to those who think they understand the Scripture more than anybody else, didn't you read this? Why don't you go learn something? Haven't you read what David did? And he points back to a story in 1 Samuel where David is on the run. Saul, the king of Israel, wants to kill David because he knows David is the next in line for the throne. So David's on the run, and on the run he has nothing. He took nothing with him, no weapons, no provisions, no anything. And he finds himself at a temple, at a tabernacle, and he goes to the priest and asks him, do you have anything to feed me? Now, in the temple, the priest would make every Sabbath bread, consecrated bread that would be placed in the holy place of the temple, and only Aaron and his sons, quote unquote, the priests, were allowed to eat of it. And so David shows up and says, do you have anything? He says, this is all I have. And then he offers it to David. What I believe Jesus is indicating to them is that there was at least appeared to be some elasticity to the laws of the Sabbath for the sake of caring for people. Matthew would add that Jesus would say, he'd give another example. He would say that even the priests, based on your interpretation as religious leaders, even the priests break the Sabbath then, because every Sabbath they offer sacrifices within the temple. And then Jesus would say, something greater than the temple is here. Again, making a statement of who he is and his standing in the community and in the world. He looks at them and he says, you missed the point. The day of the Sabbath is a day of rest. There's flexibility within the ceremonial laws of the Sabbath to protect the people, to care for the people. It was meant to give rest. You're making it more of a burden. You're adding more to the call of God than what God has actually called for. And he says something greater than the temple is here. In essence, speaking of himself, he's saying, I'm greater than the temple. What's intriguing is in Matthew's account, right before this story, Jesus had just said, come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. The Sabbath was a day of rest. Jesus was an eternity of rest. Jesus says something greater than the temple is here. Now, we look at it from a perspective of we understand who Jesus is. We understand that he's the Son of the living God, the Messiah, but they didn't see that. The religious leaders just viewed him as some crazy guy. Some guy, okay, maybe he did some great things, but they chalked that up to demonic spirits. They didn't accept him for who he was, but Jesus continued to say, this is who I am. And he's saying to them, listen, the Sabbath is the Lord's day. I am the Lord. Therefore, it's my day. I'm not burdened by your interpretations or structures of the Sabbath. I am, and specifically, he says, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. I interpret the Sabbath law. I don't live under your structure, your perspectives. And it's so intriguing to me, the Pharisees, they follow him around. You ever do that? Some of you have kids. The other day, my kids were doing something. My wife headed off to work. I'm waiting to get them ready for school, and the neighbor boy's over, and all of a sudden I hear them, let's go in the other room. Let's go, all right. What do you do as a parent? I follow my kids. I go where, oh, okay, what are we doing in the other room? And I just go stand there, and they look at me like, yeah, what do you need? I'm like, I just know you're up to something, so I'm going to be here. I'm right here. Whenever you decide to do whatever you're up to doing. That's what I get the picture that the Pharisees are just following him around. They're walking through fields, and the Pharisees are just like, what you up to? What you going to do? And Jesus explains to them time and time again, I am the person you don't want to believe I am. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Why do I do what is unlawful? I don't do what's unlawful. I wrote the law. I interpret the law. And he says to them, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. And I think it creates an important question for us. The Lord is, or Jesus, Lord of what? You fill in the blank. For us, it may not be, we don't have Sabbath issues. But what is it that Jesus is not the Lord of in your life? What is that thing that you're holding on to, that your interpretation, your perspective, your understanding of, you're just not going to let go of it? And Jesus is saying, no, I'm Lord of that too. What is the thing that Jesus is not Lord of in your life? This is not the only time that they wrestle with Jesus. In fact, he would heal a man who was paralyzed for decades. And he told him, pick up your mat and go home. Well, guess what day it was when he did that? It was a Sabbath. And the Pharisees see him carrying a mat, which is work on their interpretation, work on the Sabbath, and they say, why are you doing what's unlawful? Who told you to do this? And he said, I don't know his name. Well, they've come to find out it's Jesus. And Jesus later would say, I did one thing and you want to kill me. And they're like, you're a madman. Why do you think we want to kill you? Because I healed on the Sabbath, you want to kill me. Yet you understand that if a child, in their cultural setting, if a child hits their 8th day, they're to be circumcised, even if that 8th day fell on the Sabbath. He says, if you would circumcise on the Sabbath and do what the law has said you're to do to be ceremonial clean, why can I not do what makes a person fully clean on the Sabbath? He would later heal a man who was born blind. Guess what day it was on? The Sabbath. And their issue is that Jesus did it on the Sabbath. Think about that. He heals somebody paralyzed, he heals a man born blind, and they can't see the miraculous. They're stuck on their rules and regulations. And they began questioning the man. Well, who did this? I don't know his name. Well, we know that he's not of God because God wouldn't do this on the Sabbath. He said, whether he is of God or not, I don't know. All I know is I was blind and now I see. Their issue was this structure that they had created, and Jesus wasn't Lord of anything for them. What is the blank for you? What's the place in your life where Jesus is yet to become Lord? Yet to have control and structure. They were missing the point. And again, Matthew tells us that Jesus says, if you understood what it means, I desire mercy more than sacrifice, you would not have condemned these innocent ones. They were so focused on external religious acts, they didn't truly have a heart for God or what God desires. There's another story in 2 Chronicles chapter 30. The story is of a king named Hezekiah who for many years the nation of Israel was living in sin and idolatry. They had all these idols and different places of idol worship set up. Hezekiah becomes king. He strips it all down. He removes all of the idol worship. He reestablishes the temple. He reestablishes the priests, the feasts, all the ceremonial laws. And he calls them to celebrate the Passover. And we read that all of the people of the nation celebrated the Passover, but many of them had not gone through the process of being ceremonially clean to do so. And here's Hezekiah's prayer. He prays, may the Lord, who is good, pardon everyone who sets their heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, even if they are not clean according to the rules of the sanctuary. And we're told that God heard his prayer and healed the people. God is far more concerned about a heart that is in pursuit of him than lips that speak empty words. He's far more concerned about individuals who are passionate about what he's passionate about, who seek mercy, than those who just offer religious sacrifice for the sake of appearance and surface issues. My fear is that while we may not have the same religious structure of the Pharisees as a church in the West, we can go through the process. We could show up Sunday. We can go through all the religious motions and still have hearts that are very far from God. And still have hearts unwilling to say Jesus is Lord of anything in my life. And Jesus flips it. He begins to reveal to them that love for God is inseparably connected to love for other people. And he asks them a question. It says in verse 6, on another Sabbath. So a week passes by. They're still following him around. Another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. I love that. That's Luke the doctor. He recognizes which hand it was, or at least searched out which hand it was. His right hand was shriveled, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking to heal the man? No, they were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Now, I love this. Jesus doesn't run from the conflict, he actually creates it. They show up, it's another Sabbath, a man walks in, his hand is paralyzed, he can't use it. And they are not concerned about finding healing for this man. They're not even concerned about the man and the life he has to live. They just want to see if Jesus is going to do what breaks their structure and law. And Jesus doesn't wait until after service. He purposefully puts it front and center because he wanted to teach something. So he tells the man, stand in front of everybody, and then he asks this question. Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it?" They ask him, "Why do you do what's unlawful?" He asks them, "What's lawful?" In their perspective, if it wasn't life-threatening, it could wait till tomorrow. Now think about that. You can't use your hand, but you can wait another day. You can't see, but you could wait another day. You can't walk, but you can wait another day because we don't work on the Sabbath. So Jesus asks the question, what's lawful? To do good or to do evil? There's only one answer. And they don't answer. Because they know that if they answer, they give credibility to Jesus and his words. So they just stand there. And it says Jesus looked. He looked at them all. Mark writes and says that he looked at them with distress and anger. Both characteristics of the nature of God, compassion and wrath, found in the same place. He looks at them with compassion because their hearts are so broken, they don't even care about other people in their lives. And he looks at them with anger because they're unwilling to do what God has called them to do to serve others. He says, what's lawful? And then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and he was completely restored. He doesn't touch him. He doesn't make clay. The interesting story, when Jesus heals the man born blind, he spits in the dirt. It's not COVID protocol. And then he makes mud and he rubs it on the guy's eyes. He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't make clay. He doesn't touch him. He doesn't even say, "You are healed." He just says, "Stretch out your hand." They couldn't even accuse him of working. They couldn't even say, "Wait a second, he just said, "Stretch out your hand," and the guy's healed. And then we're told they leave there and they try to figure out how to kill him. Now, here's where I got stuck. Why so serious? Why that reaction? Why is the Sabbath so significant to them that if Jesus would do anything that broke their structure, they wanted to murder him? They have issue with him healing on the Sabbath, but they have no issue with them working out a plot to kill him on the Sabbath. Why is it that extreme? And as I began digging, what I think I found is that they understood that Jesus threatened their very way of life. He threatened their status. He threatened their way of making a living. He threatened their entire existence. Guys, I want to tell you, he will threaten your very way of life too. Jesus threatens our way of life. He shows up and he calls us to things that go well beyond what we actually want to do. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless those who curse you. Does that threaten anybody's way of life? What Jesus calls us to threatens our very way of life, and he intends to. It's why he wasn't willing to let this go. It's why he put it front and center. And what stood out to me, this perspective, as I'm asking why, what's the purpose, what's the meaning? Jesus is indicating to them the why is a heart for God and a life in service of others. The call that God has called us to is to allow our why to be a heart in search of God and a life in service of others. It's the great commandment. Love God with everything in you, which is inseparably connected to love other people. I cannot not love people and love God at the same time. They're inseparably connected. And the reason Jesus was unwilling to let this go, the reason this Sabbath day became such an issue, was because they lost the sense of why. It's to love God. He says, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. They began to set all these structures that allowed them to benefit themselves while ignoring their neighbors. Mark shares a story where they say, Jesus says, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me because you say everything that I have is Corban. What that literally means is everything I have belongs to God. And it sounds super noble and righteous and pious. But what they're saying is, sorry, Mom and Dad, I can't help you because all my stuff is God's. They're creating their own structure to ignore what God has actually called them to do. Where in our lives have we created a structure that justifies the things we think, the things we say, the things we do, but they're so out of tune with the heart of God? They're so out of touch with service of other people. Because God's call is to have a heart for God and a life in service of others. What is lawful? What's lawful is to do what is good. What's lawful is to love others. What's lawful is to have a heart for God. Again, I ask the question, what is Jesus not Lord of in your life? You know, we can sit around and I don't do this and I don't do that. I don't have this and I don't have that. And feel really good about our religious standing. But the very literal neighbor who lives next to us, we have no love for whatsoever. The very people in our lives, family members, extended family members, we find ways to excuse why we don't have to care for them or help them or love them. And we could justify it. But I just wonder what Jesus' why would be. What would the heart of God be? To sacrifice, to love, to care for others. What is Jesus not Lord of? Our why, our purpose, our reason is to have hearts that are in search of God and lives that are in service of other people. I believe that those two things can direct every component of our everyday life. Why do we do what we do? because I'm in search of God and I'm in service of others. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the example that you give us. And I know that in my own life it's so easy for me to find justification. We can find ways to make the Scripture say whatever we want it to say, to give us credence to avoid the things that you have so clearly called us to. You said, I desire mercy more than sacrifice. I desire that you love your neighbor, that you care for your spouse, that you disciple your children more than you show up at church every Sunday and make sure you get to that Bible study. Oh, make sure you're in a small group. All good things. But Lord, so often we use those as a cloud of righteousness, this idea that somehow we've arrived, we've made it, and yet too often our hearts are so far from your heart and what you've called us to. But I pray that if there's somebody here this morning who has never made you Lord of their life in any category, that they would recognize that you are the Lord, the Son of the living God. That you, Jesus Christ, died for their sins and came back to life to give them new life. And you said, whoever believes in me, whoever confesses with their mouth that I am Lord and believes in their heart that I've been raised from the dead, that they will be saved. Lord, I pray that they would take that step this morning. But Lord, I ask for those who have made that profession. Lord, I ask that if there's arenas in our lives, if there's those blanks in our lives that we have not made you Lord of, that today would be the day we surrender it to you. That we would have hearts that are in tune with yours. And if we have hearts that are in tune with yours, we will live for your desires. Father, I pray if there's forgiveness that needs to be offered, if there's grace that needs to be offered, there's love and prayer and blessing that needs to be offered, that we would offer it. That we would not find loopholes, workarounds, but that we would be who you've called us to be. Men and women who have hearts that are in search of you and lives in service of others. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.